Welcome back to a lifetime of Mafia tales. Today, Sal and I talk about the fourth Mafia hitman he was close with. The name of the hitman was Angelo Ruggiero, also known as Quack Quack. Angelo's uncle was a very famous mob figure in that world. He was an underboss of the Gambino crime family. His uncle's name was Neil Delacroce. In Angelo's early life, he came up with John Gotti in the same area. They went and joined a gang together and eventually entered their way into the Mafia. They both became made men in the Gambino family after taking out a man named James McBratney. Angelo would go on to be the biggest downfall the Mafia could ever have. He was caught on many wiretaps the feds put in his phone, and they heard many criminal conversations. Another bad move Angelo did was giving false orders to Sammy the Bull to kill a member of their own crime family. He had told Sammy that John Gotti gave him these orders while he was in prison. Even after all this, he was still in the family, but he would eventually be sent out of the mob after attempting to kill another made man by the name of Anthony Casso, who was a Lucchese crime family member. So please be sure to subscribe to our Patreon channel for more exclusive content from Sal and I. And without further ado, let's get into Angelo's story. One quick thing before we get started with this podcast. This episode is just half of it. The rest of it's on Patreon. If you want to get our full podcast, please subscribe to our Patreon channel. Our Patreon channel link is in the video description below. All right, Sal, we're back, man. How you doing today?
Good.
I'm good, man. I'm excited for another episode of A Lifetime of Mafia Tales. Today we're going to be talking about the fourth hitman that you were close with, Angelo Ruggiero. A lot of people know him as Quack Quack.
Right.
And, it ended up being caught on wiretaps and getting the Gambino family, especially Gotti's crew, Paul Castellano, and some deep shit. So today we're going to be covering him. And, we were supposed to, we on our last episode, we did briefly talk about maybe doing Charles Carniglia, but we want to do a little bit more research on him. So you guys will see him coming up. So don't think we forgot about it. But yeah, I mean, the way that we can go into this, Al, I think is I'll bring up Angelo's early life, and you just let me know what your thoughts on it and where you fit in.
Right.
Okay. So what I researched is that Angelo's early life, his family, like meaning his mom and dad, and didn't really they weren't involved with the mob, but he had an uncle, Neil Delacroce, that was the underboss of the Gambino family. So that's kind of what he gravitated to. And then he had brothers that were named John and Frankie Ruggiero, and then he also had his brother Salvatore Ruggiero. And then they were both Angelo. He was born in 1940, New York, Brooklyn, and then he eventually came across Gotti when they're I believe 12 years old, and Gotti moved into their neighborhood, and they started to do little crimes. And from what I read is that they were robbing cars, even robbing drunk people that would come out of bars and stuff and stick them up and rob them, and just little petty crimes back then. But they would eventually form or join their own gang. Do you know a gang they became a part of?
No, I didn't know anything about those guys until the 70s.
Okay. Well, I know Willie Boy had joined their gang as well, and some other guys. But I mean, Willie Boy and Angelo's relationship would go on to, it would be a rocky relationship, as you said that Willie would refer to him as fat fuck.
Right.
So the way that they got involved with the Gambinos, though, their crew, was that they had been given the opportunity. Well, actually, Gotti had gotten close with the Faticos. He started doing, I believe, hijackings with Angelo Ruggiero and Charles Carniglia, Salvatore Ruggiero, Gene Gotti. So that's what they did. They did their hijackings first, and then they were given the opportunity to become made men, and that was the whole McBratney deal. But they also got pinched before that for the hijacking. There was they were doing a hijacking, and then the police were watching them, and then they all ended up getting 3 years for that. But they would go on to doing the McBratney murder, and that's the whole thing that me and you covered in our previous episode. So if anyone hasn't watched that, we did an in-depth episode on who killed James McBratney and how John Gotti, Angelo Ruggiero, and then that Ralph, they were given the opportunity to become made men in the Gambino family. And that's how they got close, and that was by then. That was probably the time that you met them, was a little bit after that whole McBratney murders. I mean, do you think that's where you kind of fit into meeting these guys?
I think I actually met them before the McBratney murder.
Oh, okay. And this was, yeah, because they would have been associates and stuff, and they wouldn't have been made back then. Because it
No,
would.
I actually met those guys Christmas time of '71. Then by February, John Gotti got out of jail, came to Sinatra Club. So all of '72 and '73, I got real close to them because we were hijacking trucks. We had to have sit downs, as I said before, to allow Foxy from the Gambino family, myself from the Colombo family, and eventually Tommy from Lucchese family were approved to work together. And that's what you had to do back in those days. You just couldn't go work with someone from another family without getting a sit down, getting it approved. And that's how I met those guys in '71, '72.
Yeah. And when you met them, what was that like? What was the encounter? Well, with Angelo specifically, when did you meet him for the first time?
Well, he came to the Sinatra Club with John Gotti and Gene Gotti. I didn't have a lot of conversation with them because Cataldo kept me insulated from them, because Cataldo and I were dealing drugs and he was cautious. He didn't want anybody to know that we were dealing drugs. So we had, there was the secret life of the mob, but within Cataldo and I, we had another secret section, and that was dealing heroin. Yeah. So, and it was all about a show of gambling. And in the Sinatra Club, we had all these guys coming in there. Everybody was associated. Yeah, there was connections made. There was all types of gambling. There was a notice, okay, there's going to be a crap game. Charlie Fatico ran his own crap game, but it wasn't at the Sinatra Club. They would go to a moving crap game, once behind the Bergen, another time at another storefront. And that's how they would pass the information on to all the gamblers and invite them to crap games. So I would, Cataldo and I would go to their crap games. Willie Boy would be there, Angelo, John. That was the thing that Willie Boy liked, was a crap game. He didn't play poker much. He didn't care for poker, no.
Yeah, so, I mean, when Gotti, Angelo, and Willie Boy, I mean, they all came together when they would come to the Sinatra Club. So it wasn't just like you had this one-on-one encounter with Angelo. I mean, it was just like these group of guys come in, and then, you talk, you get close, and eventually work your way into talking about crimes and stuff. Right. I mean, so do you recall any crime stories or how you guys even crossed that line, so you would become, okay, Angelo's cool, okay, Sal's cool, now we can do crimes together?
Well, somehow, all three of us, Foxy, Tommy, and I, realized that Jimmy Burke was the guy that had the connections in the airport. So he would get information and we'd hijack a truck. Occasionally, information would come through Fatico. I wasn't paying attention where he got his information, but they would give us a name of a trucking company, a plate number, when the truck was picking up, cargo, and Foxy and I would, and Tommy would hijack that truck. So we did a bunch of those, and I would meet, most of the time I drove the truck drivers around as hostages. And after 2 hours, I dropped them off and I would go back to where the truck full of the merchandise was being unloaded. And Angelo would be in there. Charlie Fatico would be there. Gotti would be there. Everybody would be getting a count, a tally up of what merchandise we hijacked and what we were going to get, how much money we were going to get for it. So it was all done pretty much, as a shared heist after we got the merchandise. But it was quick. We might have hijacked a truck on a Friday morning, and by Friday night we had already got paid. And, each one of the families got a little taste. But it didn't take me long to figure out, if we were hijacking, say, imported garments from South America, and those garments were $100, $150, which was a lot of money those days, we got $7, $6, and everybody was getting a piece of the action. And of course, we were the ones who were doing the work. So after about 6 months, I decided, well, we got to do something different. And I didn't want Charlie Fatico taking over the whole inventory of the truck that we heisted because there was no way to negotiate with him. He would say, all right, you're going to get 40,000. And that was it. When in fact, we could have got maybe 70 or 80,000. So Cataldo knew that. He was okay with it for a while until Cataldo set up another building, which was known as the drop, where the truck would back in, drop off the merchandise, and I'd have to hold the drivers for a couple hours, and then we'd go back to that particular drop, and then Cataldo would bring in some buyers. And then Jimmy Burke was always in the mix because he probably gave the best price.
Right. Yeah, and I remember you saying that, about the whole connections and how they would bring in and how Jimmy would always give you the best deals and stuff.
Right, right.
With Angelo though, I mean, do you recall any any early heists that you guys may have did together, any armed robberies or?
Well, we did a couple of truckloads, like a truckload of sweaters, a truckload of suits. And then Angelo was always in the middle because he was up Charlie Fatico's butt, And then I didn't get to talk to those guys. Cataldo was in the middle of it. He was getting the taste. So that was okay for the first year. But after that, I was looking for bigger and better. I wasn't looking to make $10,000 or $20,000, $30,000 heists.
Yeah.
Well, that was pretty good money then.
Yeah, and I was going to say, so the one that you do remember, I mean, can you go into depth about how that went down and just the robbery? I mean, the details of going on this with him. What was his position?
Angelo had this guy named Tootie. Tootie was what we call a sneak thief. He knew the mink business. There was a particular place in New York where there was the fur district. In New York, you had garment district on certain streets, fur district on a couple of streets. You had jewelry district on streets. And so Tootie would specialize in finding, drivers that were willing to steal some of the minks, and he would buy and sell them, or he would actually sell them. So he had information. Somehow he gave Angelo information about a place in the Bronx that finished the minks. They were like raw minks. They would go in there and they would do fur finishing. And so he was involved in this heist that we did. And we had to take him with us. And it was complicated because it was myself and it was Foxy, it was Red Collins and Tootie. Well, Tootie didn't pay attention to all that he had to do. And when we hijacked the truck, Foxy and I, alarms went off, loud ringing alarms. So we had to figure out how to cut the alarm off and hold the drivers at the same time. Tootie ran away from the heist scene. Foxy had to run after him and catch him. Well, by the time we got him back to where the truck was, and I got him in the car, the chase car, and Red Collins and Foxy drove the truck away. I drove off with Tootie, and as I think I might have told you, was like we had to keep these two drivers for like 2 hours while Foxy and Red took the truck to wherever it was going to be, like the drop where Charlie Fatico had set up a building to use to drop off the merchandise. In the meantime, I had instructed Tootie to make sure that the car was a 4-door car. It was probably an Oldsmobile back then. And that he had filled the gas up, checked the oil, checked the water. And as we're driving, it was in July of 73, we're driving down through Manhattan after we left the Bronx. The car overheated. And we had the 2 hostages under the blanket in the back of the car. It's like 80, 90 degrees out, and these guys were under a blanket. In the meantime, the car was bubbling over. So I pulled over. I said, look, I'll stay with these drivers. And in those days, I think I told you, you couldn't buy bottles of water. So I told him, go to the nearest delicatessen or grocery store and get 4 or 5 bottles of club soda, and I'll put that in the radiator. Okay, that's what we did. We got away from Manhattan, took those truck drivers out to Long Island, got them out from underneath the blanket. They were dying under there because these guys were older guys, I didn't want a guy to have a heart attack. And we got them something to eat. We got them a couple of Cokes and stuff. We had 2 or 3 hours. And then we called where Foxy had taken the truck. He said, it's okay, we're going to take the truck out of the building and dump it. You can come over to the drop in an hour, 40 minutes, whatever. So I dropped off the drivers, and then we went over to where the merchandise was, and Gotti was in there, and Angelo was there, and Charlie Fatico was there. And we explained, Foxy took Angelo aside and explained what Tootie did. Tootie, tried to defend himself, saying he didn't run away, but he actually ran away. He was scared. And so maybe a day or two later, Angelo told him to come out to the Bergen, took him for a walk, slapped him around, and chased him. And I think that he didn't give him any money out of the 25,000 we got. I think Angelo kept the money, because that's the type of guy he was, So we never did see Tootie again. He wasn't the same Tootie as Tootie Franzese. His name was Tootie Laguette. He had like a French name. And he was sort of a creepy guy who wound up killing his wife and going to jail for life.
And was he an associate of anyone's, or just?
I don't think so. He was sort of what you call a freelance guy. He was bouncing around. Mm-hmm. Guys like him would get involved with a crew. Then they'd screw up and they'd beat him up, chase him off. And then we never saw him again. We don't know what happened to him, but he could have got us killed and all. But we wound up getting a little bit of money. That was the 25,000 that they said we had to take. And that was the last time I used the Faticos to drop hot merchandise, stolen merchandise, truck hijackings and stuff. Mm-hmm. But that was a nightmare. And then Angelo, said, okay, we got rid of this guy Tootie, and he said I should have killed him, but I slapped him around, and that was the story. That's what happened.
Yeah. So I mean, you really saw his aggressive side after that, and
yeah.
Yes. So as you got closer with him, what? You started doing stuff with Jimmy Burke. So, I mean, was Angelo started, he wasn't a part of the heist as much since you weren't doing it with the Faticos?
No, I mean, Foxy had to report to John Gotti and Fatico every time we did a heist, and I guess he gave them some money. We never talked about what Foxy gave his side, Gotti or Fatico, and I didn't have to give Cataldo anything because I was dealing drugs with him.
No need
he
for
didn't
money.
Care. Yeah, he didn't care about the money from a heist,
Yeah. So
we just had to keep everything quiet.
Yeah, and so with Angelo, then as you progressed and you kept going on in your career in the mob, did you ever cross paths with him again?
Oh yeah, on and off I'd see him at the Bergen, and so that heist was in '73, the fur truck.
Mm-hmm.
It was about a year later. I remember I went to federal prison in July. So around June, well, there was an incident, and I'm not sure exactly how it all unfolded, but I want to say spring of '73, Gotti grabbed a hold of Foxy and said, look, you got to rent the car for me. And you and Ubats, you guys got to go to Florida and go to Florida, stay there 3 or 4 days. And Foxy didn't give me any details. He said, look, I'm going to rent this car. We're going to give it to John, but we're going to get on a plane and we're going to go to Florida for 3 or 4 days. He said, they're going to do something with the car. The car's in my name. I know when I come back, the law is going to be after me. I'm not sure what they're putting in the car. He didn't tell me they were going to put a body in the car. So we did exactly what Gotti said. We rented the car, bought tickets in our name. In those days, you could buy a airline ticket with no name on it.
No, just nothing at all. I mean, that's pre 9/11, man. That's a whole different time.
Oh, that's way back.
That's insane.
50 years ago. And no record of getting on the airplane where you're going. So we got the tickets. We got the tickets in our name. We got the car. Foxy got the car in his name. We went to Florida. I remember very clearly we stayed at this place called the Newport Hotel in Fort Lauderdale. And we were there for 3 or 4 days. And then Foxy said, I called John. We can go back now. So when we got back, Foxy had heard from Gotti that the attorney, we all had the same attorney, this guy, Mike Oriel, got a call from Queens Homicide. They found the car. They found the body in it. And the car was in Foxy's name. He had to report to Queens Homicide to answer some questions. Naturally, Gotti and Coro had everything lined up. We had all the paperwork where we were. it was really interesting. Foxy took his license, his rental agreement from the rental car agency, and the ticket from the airline ticket and the hotel receipt that showed we were there like 4 days. That was exactly when the guy who was murdered was found in the car. So he had a concrete alibi, and they didn't bother Foxy anymore. Nobody ever got arrested for that murder. I don't even know who the guy was in the car. We never talked about it. So that was 73. Well, after that, I sort of moved away from Gotti and Angelo for a while. But in 74, because I had gotten convicted of bank robbery, I had to go to court to postpone my sentencing. And when I picked up my attorney, Mike Cotto, he said, look, we need to go to Staten Island to pick up Angelo. I think I already told the story.
Oh, yeah, you did. Yeah. In our previous episode with Gotti, and you went, it was after the McBratney murder. And
right.
that's right. Where it all fits in and ties in, where you had that meeting with him. And then, you went and met John. And then, I mean, he kissed John, the lawyer.
Cohen kissed Gotti on both cheeks. And when we walking back to the car in Manhattan, Angelo looked at me. He said, "Oh, boss, don't ever tell a soul that faggot kissed John Gotti." Yeah. And Gotti laughed a little bit. Angelo laughed. My attorney laughed. And there we were. We took Gotti and dropped him off again somewhere. He was hiding out. He was on the lam. And then I didn't see Angelo until a few months later when I got to prison. He was already there in Lewisburg. And we met up in Lewisburg now. So he was hanging out with Joe Piney, Johnny Dio, and Paulie Vario. He was in the room with them, the 4-man room, in that Mobster row, we called it like. And then, I hung out and we talked, and this, that, and the other thing. Then I got out the following year, 75. Late 75. By 76, I was deep in the drug business with Cataldo. And there was no more hijacking. Foxy had been killed. And while I was in jail, Angelo came to me around Christmas time. Foxy had already been killed. I believe Foxy was killed the week before Christmas. And within a few days, Angelo said to me, we know who did it. We're going to take care of the guy who did it. And then he said that Tommy DeSimone killed him. That was like Christmas time. Well, as it happened, it was February. Tommy DeSimone showed up in Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary on his way to Atlanta. They would bring overnight in Lewisburg, and then would put him on a bus and take him to Atlanta. So I did get to see Tommy. And by that time, I was, I always thought, I was thinking, okay, how am I going to get to kill him? And Angelo said, don't do it. So then months and months went by. By the end of 75, I was out and Tommy was in. And I didn't hear from him for 2 years or almost 3 years. And by the time he got out and Angelo was hanging out, he was out of prison. John was out of prison in 77. I did see Tommy DeSimone. I had no idea what was going on. And he approached me and said he had a big piece of work to do. Would I be interested in going? And he needed money and he had some jewelry and I was buying gold at that time. I gave him some money. I said, Tommy, I'm not doing any more heist. After Foxy, I'm not doing any more heist. That's it. I'm strictly in the powder business, I told him. So I didn't see him for a while. And then all of a sudden, they did the Lufthansa heist. And I ran into him once or twice. And then Angelo and I think I met Angelo at Dominic's restaurant. Dominic had gotten made. They all got made that same time, 76, 77, 78, I should say. Actually, 77 is when they got made, John and Angelo. That's when Gotti got out of jail. And there was smirks about Tommy, and that was it. I think Angelo wanted to take credit for killing him with John, but he didn't go into all the details. Mm-hmm. And that was about it. I didn't see Angelo on and off, maybe between 78, 79. I might have seen him. Oh, I did see him at the wake when Frankie Gotti was killed. Everybody went to John Gotti's son's wake. and I'd see him around the neighborhood, but I was no longer hanging out with those guys. I backed away from Gotti and Angelo, and I really didn't see him anymore until I guess maybe when I testified at the trial. That was about it.
Damn. Okay.
I
Okay.
just backed away from that whole group.
Okay. So let's back up to the Frankie Gotti deal, and then we'll go into the testifying part. But
Yeah.
so with the it is believed, it's not, it's just alleged, I suppose, that Angelo would have been one of the guys that would have went and did that. I mean, because he was close with Gotti, and I'm sure. I
Yeah.
mean, what shine some light on that? What are your thoughts on that?
I didn't hear anything about it. I mean, it was a whole rumor around the neighborhood they were going to kill that
Right.
guy who accidentally ran over the kid. But at the same time, my connection to Clorio was deep. And occasionally he would mention little things that was going on about how the feds were watching everybody. And of course, years later, all the dirt came out about how foolish and stupid that Angelo really was. He might have been street smart, but he was not very bright,
Mhm.
because after the kid got killed, I guess it was in 1980. I'm sure that um, the feds had started to focus in on that whole group, Gotti and
Yeah.
Angelo, and of course we didn't know it, but Willie Boy was given the information.
Yeah.
He
And
knew that he was given that information.
I wanted to say
So
too with Willie Boy, from what I researched, was that he became an informant after he had gotten busted, and the
right,
Faticos didn't give him any money while he was in prison. Do you
exactly,
believe that to be true?
absolutely, yeah,
Hmm.
yeah.
Okay. And then
And I got to know Willie Boy good, but I didn't realize that he was a snaky type of a guy. And for some reason, we knew another guy that was dealing drugs. And that guy that I knew told Willie Boy, hey, Sal got a chemist. He can test heroin. So one time I tested some drugs for him. And I gave him a reading, a printout, and all. And I didn't know it, but he was giving information to the feds and the state of New York. And that was in the early 80s.
yeah.
So,
Well,
yeah, Willie Boy was the double double.
yeah. I mean, so Angelo as well was in the drug business, and his brother was as well. But he didn't get involved, I think, until his brother was dead, and then he started taking over his affairs and stuff. But let's talk about Angelo's brother Salvatore. What did you ever meet him?
Oh yeah, I knew him. I knew him occasionally. He was way ahead of the curve on certain crimes. Like before he was in the drug business, he was a master at stealing cars
Hmm.
and dealing stolen cars. I mean, he would clone them and sell them. I mean, the guy was very smart guy. But John Gotti didn't like him. He hated him.
How come?
I don't know. He was smart. He didn't need John Gotti. He was clever and he made a lot of money. Um, there was something about him. I don't think he thought he had enough balls or something. And Angelo was close enough, but for some reason, there was always a conflict with John Gotti and Sally Ruggiero. Of
Yeah.
course, my attorney, he represented all these guys, and I'd get little bits and pieces of information. And Mike Corio would confide in me that he had a connection in the Brooklyn federal court, and he was getting information about investigations to do with, the whole crew, the whole Angelo, John, the whole Gambinos, when in fact, I guess he did have a certain amount of information, and he was more involved with them as the years went by because he did represent Cataldo also. So we were friends. He wasn't just my attorney. It's like he never gave me a figure how much my legal fees were. I
Hmm.
made a score, I'd give him 1,000 or two. I took care of his car because I had a car shop. When I had the jewelry store, he had a wife named Stephanie and a girlfriend named Stephanie. So when Christmas came, I had to make 2 diamond gifts for him, maybe like a bracelet with an S on it. He gave one to his wife, one to his girlfriend. They were both named Stephanie. So we were really close. He came to all my family parties and all my choreo. We were very close. And
Yeah.
I'm sure he was shocked when I flipped because he came to tell me that Henry flipped.
And
Like,
now, what do you feel about that?
well, it's like, oh boy, okay. That was sort of early on. This was before it was known in the papers who was flipping. When Henry flipped, it turned the whole mob upside down because everybody was worried what and who they were dealing with. But for Gotti and Angelo, I mean, Angelo was just a guy who followed John Gotti. He didn't
Yeah.
have an original thought. He was not creative. Okay.
And that's what I was going to say. From what I researched, they did their early gang, and then,
Yeah.
Gotti started to become an associate of the Fatico crew, and then
Right.
Angelo was with them, and then they became a made man, and then,
Right.
then he took over Gotti's crew. He became the capo over there at the Bergen Hut. But what were you going to say? You were expanding on him, not having his original
Well,
thought.
the feds were getting smart. In those days, in the early 80s, it was almost impossible to get authorization to wiretap somebody's house. I mean, you had to have extreme PC, probable cause, to get authorization to put a microphone in the house to record, conversations and stuff. But little by little, I guess with the help of Willie Boy and maybe who else, there was other people that were sort of collaborating where Willie Boy
For
would talk about, information he had. Somebody else, another informant who didn't know Willie Boy was an informant, gave the feds information. They put that together. They presented it to a judge. And before you know it, they were closely watching Angelo. Now, he was so naive that he told a friend or something, oh, yeah, the feds, I'm moving to Long Island. Feds won't know where I'm living. I mean, he was just in a bubble, really.
I was going to add on to it. From what I researched, they said that Angelo had said to Willie Boy that he had a secure line in the house, and it was his daughter's phone, and that's where
Right.
that whole came from. And then
Right.
that's how the feds put that wiretap
Yeah.
in that little phone. But it was that was Willie Boy who had said that, I believe.
And I don't know who introduced him to this guy. I think his name might have been Conroy or something, but he was supposed to be like a telephone repairman when in fact he was an undercover FBI agent. So, and they were all using this guy Conroy, John Caniglia, John Gotti. They all got information. Okay, find out if my phone is safe. Find out if my car is safe. So he gave them bogus information.
Yeah.
He said, "Oh yeah, nobody's watching you, nobody's listening to you, that kind of thing."
And it wasn't true at all. And
No.
when he was on these wiretaps, from what you can recall and what you've heard, what was being said on these with John or Angelo?
Well, there was all types of conversations. He was talking about drugs. I remember there was a little guy named Pete, little Pete. I think his name was Peter Tambone or something, and he was caught on other wiretaps. And what happened was there was admissions between Angelo and maybe one or two other guys that they were dealing drugs. Of course, Castellano wanted to listen to those tapes.
Yeah.
And then Angelo threatened the attorneys, if you give the tapes, I'll kill you. So Castellano never got the tapes. And it was very damaging, whatever it was.
Well, to add to that too, Neil Delacroix, that he was going back and forth with Paul,
Right.
and he was trying to get Neil to get those tapes from Angelo, but Neil kept putting it off and
Right.
off and off. But
Yeah.
he never got them.
Yeah. Delacroix was kind of protecting Angelo. In the middle of it all was Gotti, because I don't believe Gotti might have been on the tapes. He was smart enough not to give information on those tapes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I don't think he would have been on the phone, but I mean, a lot of guys you wouldn't have thought they would have been on the phone like that discussing
Right.
business. But
Yeah.
I think he was even conducting his brother's drug trade, because at that point, was his brother already killed in that plane crash when Angelo was on those tapes?
I think it continued. The tapes it was a running thing on the wiretaps. And when his brother got killed, even the attorney was caught saying, "We found the heroin." I think he told Gene Gotti, "We found it." So they had to go to New Jersey. Somehow I heard that they went to Florida in a motorhome, either to pick up the heroin or bring the heroin back. And the government was wise to it all. I mean, they were just building and building. You got to understand how the FBI worked. They had information of a particular crime that happened, let's say, this week. They didn't go bust anybody 2 days later. They used that information to build more evidence and kept it. It was like with the informants, I didn't inform on that whole crew. I got out in August of 84, went undercover for the judge in September of 84. By January, I was done. I basically worked the judge, Judge Brennan, who was corrupt. And by accident, I made a wiretap when I went to visit John Caniglia at his car lot. And it turned out to be a humorous one where he was putting down attorneys, and he talked about Angelo, and they were always talking about each other. Angelo seemed to be the center of disaster. That's what he turned out to be, because the feds had all this information on him, and they used that information to go after others.
Yeah,
So,
and that's how they got the wire in Paul Castellano's house.
Right.
He gave them probable cause, because whatever they heard on those tapes,
exactly.
it gave them enough evidence to go into Paul's house, and then Paul was, conducting business there, and then he ended up going on trial. And I think
Angelo was the key figure in leading the feds to take down the entire Gambino family. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I would say those tapes were really important. He implicated a lot of guys and gave them probable cause to go and check out these other guys and put them on trial, and that's exactly what they did. And with Angelo as well, I'm trying to think, with Paul, he was murdered before the trial was finished with him, I think, and
he was murdered in the middle of the proceedings. He was murdered December of 85. And I believe his son, I'm not sure, maybe it was Della Croce's son, they were also on the indictment. So he was murdered December, and then the trials didn't even take place for another year or two.
Damn. Yeah, and Angelo they had formed the hit squad, John Gotti, Sammy, and they had their guys on it, but they didn't want Angelo to be a part of it, from what I researched, because he was the center of the attention again, like you said, and they just thought it was best that he didn't. So at that time, they were still like, okay, well, whatever, he didn't intentionally go and become an informant, but we're just going to keep him on.
Angelo was basically a clumsy guy. You
could say that.
you could put a Baroni suit on him and he would still look sloppy. You could dress him up, but you couldn't take him out. And he was rude and loud, and he just didn't have any tact. I mean, I do remember a little story they were bragging about. Angelo and John Gotti were sitting in a hotel once. And I guess this was the time when Reagan was president. And the Secret Service went and spotted them. They knew who they were. They said, I hope you guys can finish your drink or your lunch and leave, because the president is coming through this hotel. Then John Gotti and Angelo left the hotel, and they bragged about it. Did you ever hear that story?
No, I never heard that one, man. That's interesting.
Yeah.
And that's a little funny, a little side story. But, another one I wanted to bring up too was, so before Paul was even killed, I think, Neil was really defending Angelo, and, Angelo even told, I believe, Sammy the Bull, saying, once my uncle Neil is dead, Paul's going to come after me, take me out. And so that's why they formed, not the whole reason why they formed that thing against Paul, but that was one of the factoring reasons why, Gotti and Angelo, they wanted to get rid of him. So, I mean, that's what ultimately I think is what happened. And again, I don't think Angelo, they didn't want him to be around for that, that Paul Castellano hit.
Yeah. I think Sammy, I never listened to his podcast, but I think he explained a story about this guy called DB.
Yeah. What was his full name? Di Bernardo, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Robert
Robert
Di Bernardo.
Close to Gotti, and I think Gotti was in jail, and Angelo created some terrible rumor that DB was betraying Gotti, and then told Sammy that Gotti ordered DB to be murdered.
Right.
I think Sammy Gravano told the whole story about how he was murdered, and then the dirt came out that Angelo owed this guy $250,000. So this was happening inside the mob.
Hmm.
Guys were getting money from big drug dealers, maybe on the pretense that, oh, give me 200,000, I'll put it out in the street, and you'll get a half a point a week, and I'll get a point a week. We can make money, and then they would kill these people that gave him money.
Yeah.
So I believe that Angelo took this 200 or 250,000 from this guy and then had him murdered, so he wouldn't have to pay him. I mean
And
that's what it wasn't the way it was supposed to be in the 60s or the 50s.
no, I mean it started to change, and just to expand on this whole thing about Robert DiBernardo, that DB you refer to him as. From what I said, what I've researched, yeah, and that's what Sammy said, that Angelo had said, God, he said this Robert got to go. He's trying to form his own little crew and trying to take over leadership. Basically
Right.
start an internal thing, and then Sammy had eventually lured this guy to one of his places, his drywall company is what it was, and then they were acting as if it was a regular business meeting, and then one of Sammy's associates that were with him went to go get him a cup of coffee, is what he was saying, but he ended up shooting him in the back of the head. Yeah,
Right.
that's what I got, and then that's where
Yeah.
that came in about you saying Angelo. He was owed this guy money, is what it was, but
Right. Yeah.
to be,
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, eventually, him doing this kind of stuff, he got put on the shelf. I mean, he did all this stuff, the wiretaps,
Yeah.
this internal hit with this Robert. So from what I researched, I'll tell you what I researched about why Angelo was put on the shelf. So there was this deal with Anthony Casso. He said that Angelo was no worse than a rat. He was caught on wiretaps and he should be killed. Vic
Right.
Amuso tried to settle it, but this didn't settle the beef at all. So Angelo put a hit on Anthony Casso, but he had a local guy do it because he didn't want to kill a made guy. I mean, that's a rule that you can't break. So Anthony was able to identify the shooter because of the New York mob cops. The cops arrested the man that had shot Anthony Casso. So they picked the guy up and they went and arrested him, took him around the block, and then Anthony put him in the trunk of his car and took him to a place, tortured him, and eventually got the information saying, "Hey, Angelo told me to do this."
Right.
So at that point, Anthony called Joe Butch Crowell, and then James Jimmy Brown Fula, if I'm saying that right. And then he's like, okay, well, this is proof to you guys that I'm going to take this guy out because he did this order. He did try to kill me on orders of Angelo. And then they said okay or whatever. He brought them there for proof that these Gambino guys is who they were, to say, okay, well, we heard you now. We believe you. So after that, Anthony Castro shot this guy 15 times, and then Angelo was called to a sit down, and this was with Anthony Castro, and he wanted him dead really a lot, but at the end of the day, Angelo was shelved. They saved his life. According to I think Sammy as well, he said, he kind of said to Gotti, that he's got cancer and stuff. He's going to be gone anyway, so just shelf
Yeah.
him, and that's what happened. So what do you think about that story?
Well, I didn't know any of those details. I heard about the rumor, and I heard the reputation Castro had. He was a vicious guy, a treacherous guy. He killed so many people, and in the end, he wound up flipping because the government gave him 400 years. But the thing that bothered me was Gotti just absolutely shunned Angelo in his last days of his life and wouldn't even go visit him. So you can understand how hard and cold John Gotti was. He was done with Angelo after knowing him his entire life.
Yeah,
It's very, very sad, but that's the mark of a narcissist.
mhm. Well, I mean, that's literally, you think about it though, too. I mean, he got caught on the wiretaps. You get,
Yeah.
doing this internal stuff, giving orders that weren't even to be true. And then on
Right.
top of that, trying to, kill a made guy,
Yeah.
even, start a whole war between, families, because that could have, I mean, Lucchese's against the Gambinos because, he went and took measures into his own hands because he didn't like that insult. So
Yeah.
I don't know. It's,
Well, Castle wanted Gotti dead. I mean, he blew up Frankie DeChico, who I had met in prison. Nice guy,
Oh, I
Frankie
didn't know that you
DeChico.
met him.
Oh yeah, we were in prison together. Nice guy. Was in, years before he became close with Gotti, but Gotti knew him, and Gotti made him like the underboss.
Yeah.
And I guess Gotti was supposed to be in a car with him, and then Castro set up this bomb, and they blew up DeChico, and then Gotti knew it was for him.
Yeah.
So
The reason behind that as well, just to expand on it a little bit, was because Gotti killed Paul Castellano and I believe Vince in the Chin and
right.
the Lucchese, Anthony
Right.
Castle. They didn't like that because if you take out a boss, nobody's safe. And that's one of the
Yeah,
rules
well,
you're not supposed to
he
do.
did it without sitting down with the heads of the families, and they figure, well, if Gotti killed Castellano, it's only a matter of time before he comes after me or
Yep.
or another
Anyone.
made member. So the whole structure and respect for organized crime changed right there in the very early 80s. And by the time Gotti went to trial in 86, the one I testified with, it was rapidly different. It was just different, And then he got 5 years on the street, which was like a gift until he got convicted. And of course, if Sammy didn't flip, they might have not even got him convicted.
Yeah, that's true because he was a major factor in that.
Yeah.
Well, did you testify in Angelo then? You were in court, you said?
Angelo was on the trial. There was John Gotti, Angelo, the Carrazzo brothers, Willie Boy Johnson. I'm trying to think who else. There was a whole group on that trial.
But was he in there in court when you testified?
Oh yeah, he was
Angelo?
there.
What was his what was his facial expression?
Yeah, he just sat there smug, like, Gotti was in control of the whole proceedings.
Mm-hmm.
He knew what he was going to do, and I truly expected a fix with one of the jurors, and I warned the government. They laughed at me, and of course, Sammy years later told the whole story how they paid a juror $60,000.
Damn.
So, and they tried the same thing in the John Caniglia Gene Gotti case a couple of times, and they had mistrials.
Oh, yeah, quite a few.
Gotti put the pressure on Gene Gotti and John Caniglia. Don't dare take a plea. They could have got a 10-year plea, and they would have been out in like 40, 50 months, and they didn't have to do 30 years. They did 30-some years.
Yeah, they did get a lot of time. I mean, they could have, like you said, took the plea, but hit the boss's orders, man. They followed, and, and it's just treacherous life, from what we hear on all this shit. But, to wrap up on Angelo, he eventually died of cancer, just like his uncle Neil. I think Neil got cancer, and then, like you said, quite a few of these guys that you knew that were, killers and stuff. They, that was their ultimate demise, is what it seemed. Painful, slow death.
I know the press called John Gotti Jr. dumb fella, but I really think that Angelo was naive in the life, and he was really the dummy of dumb fellas. I mean, when we think about how dumb you could be to underestimate the feds, that what they were doing. I mean, and they had all those houses wired up. And by the time Angelo died, all that evidence went forward, and, it led to Gotti's demise, and Castellano was murdered already. And
it caused a lot of shit.
Yeah, so many other people, went to jail, and they just took apart the whole structure of New York City's organized crime families.
Yeah, it was definitely not the same after Gotti and all them were gone. No way. I mean, you've seen everything changing, and that's when you got out, 85. So it all turned around.
I knew I needed to get away in 81 or 82. Yeah, and I temporarily got out in 82, and went upstate New York, and then only to make a big mistake, go back to own drugs in 83 or 84. So when I finally did testify against Gotti, that was my ticket to get out and not go back. I mean, I didn't owe any of those guys anything. I never took a vow. I wasn't part of a family, and I didn't want to be made after I got out of jail, which was in 75. I could see the dangers in becoming a made guy. You just as well have to report to the boss, and they'll kill you in a minute. You had no recourse.
Yeah. So yeah, you lucked out on that.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, that wraps up Angelo. So do you
Yeah.
have any final thoughts or anything else you want to say before I finalize the
I
episode?
just think it's a good piece of history. I mean, really to bookmark who was the most important character in taking down organized crime. Oh yeah, Giuliani could say he was the prosecutor, but when you had guys like Willie Boy Johnson, who was undercover secretly for 15 years, and then Angelo opening his big mouth with all those recordings, it was just the beginning of the end, and that was it. And now, God only knows how many secret operations they got going on now.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you're right. Well, that everyone, that wraps up Angelo Ruggiero. So thanks everyone for watching. This is number 4. Next week we're gonna do number 5. We're not for sure on which one yet, but you'll see when it comes out. And we appreciate everyone taking out time and watching our shows and our new Patreon subscribers we've been getting. So we also want to promote that as well. If you know anybody or think you will enjoy that exclusive stuff on there and be a part of a community, please subscribe to our Patreon channel and our YouTube channel as well. The video, it'll be in the video description. You can also get Sal's books. You can get Sal's book in the clothing or on the website. It's on my clothing brand website, but we got a link in the video description. We also got the playing cards, the Sinatra Club playing cards that were played by John Gotti. Did Angelo play with these cards too?
Yeah, he came in, but he wasn't
Yeah.
much of a card player.
No, okay. Well, they were around Angelo then in his presence. But no, that's pretty much all I got to say, and we look forward to seeing everyone next week. That wraps up the 4th hitman, Angelo Ruggiero. Please comment any key takeaways that you got from this interview. If you got any interesting questions you'd like to ask Sal, please go ahead and comment. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel if you want to get more videos like this, and if you want to be a part of our exclusive community, please subscribe to our Patreon channel. We offer more exclusive in-depth content, and we also have Sal communicate back and forth with people on there. You can ask him any questions you have on there as well. In the video description, you can get an autographed copy of Sal's book, The Sinatra Club, and you can also get the 1972 Sinatra Club playing cards. Thanks everyone for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.